Hello and welcome to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast, a podcast all about constructing your career in neurology. I'm your host for today, Katherine Fu, and I'm currently a Movement Disorders Fellow at the University of California, Los Angeles, or UCLA. Today, as part of a podcast on transition to Attendinghood, the academia version, we are going to be talking with Dr. Sara Schaefer, who's an assistant professor of neurology at the Yale School of Medicine, associate program director of the Neurology Residency program, and program director of the Movement Disorders Fellowship. She is also, the executive producer of this podcast. We'll also be speaking with Dr. Parneet Grewal, who is an assistant professor at the Medical University of South Carolina and a vascular neurologist. So these two are usually our hosts on this podcast, so it's really great to hear them on the other side of the mic today, if that's a thing. And so thank you so much for being here with us today, Sara and Parneet. So I myself am making this transition to Attendinghood this fall, and I'm definitely a little bit nervous about finally taking off the 10-year-long training wheels and starting my first attending job. So I'm really looking forward to hearing both of your insights. So let's just dive right in with the first question. Sara, I'll start with you. So what was the thing that maybe surprised you the most about the transition from training to Attendinghood?
So my transition was crazy because I literally was a fellow on Friday and then I was an attending on Monday. And this may seem like this is obvious, but oh my God, I don't automatically know everything the second that I become an attending. You think that all the attendings know everything and they can see a patient and know immediately what's wrong and what to do all the time. And that's just, it's not the case. And I'm beginning to think that it's never the case. Maybe more of the case as you get further in your career and see more things. But I think one of the things that was difficult for me was actually, like you said, taking off those training wheels and realizing that the expectation was to see the patient, do the exam, and then dive directly into the assessment and plan without leaving the room. This seems trivial, but I actually had a really hard time not having that time to go out of the room and collect my thoughts and look through the patient's chart to find specific things that had popped into my mind or go quickly on PubMed or UpToDate. And so I would find myself making excuses to leave the patient's room so that I could collect myself. Like, I'll be right back. I need to check something quickly or use the bathroom. And then I would collect myself as if I was still a fellow and walk back into the room feeling better about what I was about to say to the patient.
My transition was also crazy. So I actually transitioned to an attending in the middle of the pandemic, so July 2020. So I had envisioned going into academic medicine and having colleagues all around me to run ideas, show me around, run decisions by, and then suddenly there was nobody at the hospital, only the people who were on wards and the residents, and everybody else was working from home. So I think that was a little bit difficult for me. I was very excited for the transition. I did take some time off, 3-4 weeks after my fellowship and between being an attending. So I was very excited because for me it was like, I will not have to run my ideas by somebody. I'll be independent. I'll develop my own style and make decisions right on the go. But when I actually started, I realized it was a little bit scary, especially making thrombolytic and thrombectomy decisions on the go. The patient's in the scanner, you're right there. The decisions are time sensitive, so you have to make them right then and there. And there was nobody who I could run it by and who could double check if the decision was correct. So I think that was the first year as an attending was a very big learning curve for me, especially in terms of being confident, developing my style, but also knowing my limits and knowing when, how, and who to ask for help. And one thing to me that was really helpful was that early on, I leaned in very heavily into my fellowship and residency mentors to guide me and help me with some of these challenging decisions.
Oh, absolutely. I stayed at the same institution, so I, blessedly for me and non-blessedly for them, knew all of the attendings here. And so when I was on the inpatient services, seeing things that I hadn't seen in a couple years because I did a movement fellowship, I was calling people all the time, texting them all the time, running things by them. And then when I was in the outpatient side of things, I was leaning heavily on the faculty who had trained me, just walking into their exam rooms or quartering them in the charting room. And I finally realized after, a little bit of time that basically a lot of the things they were telling me were what I was going to do or what I already thought. And the more I realized that I was just sort of leaning on them for confirmation, the less I ended up needing to lean on them in order to feel confident about my decisions.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, Sara, because I had the exact same experience. Obviously, there are cases that are, novel and that I've never encountered before. But for a lot of stuff, as time went by, I realized that most of the decisions, it was just trying to get that confirmation that I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think probably definitely myself and probably a lot of our listeners can relate to that potential fear of, am I making the right decision? Are things going to be okay? So I think it's really reassuring to hear from both of you that, as time goes on, that confirmation, you do quite well with that. This next question might be pretty similar to the first one, but, we can explore it a little bit further. What would you say was the most difficult thing about transitioning to being an attending?
Yeah, so we talked about the clinical work. Now that was definitely a big change and a great learning curve. But other thing that surprised me that I'd never really thought about was I had no idea how to manage my finances with the big paycheck. No idea about performance targets, RVUs, learning about conflict resolution, and also work-life balance and what that means when I started my job as an attending. I think that I was very surprised by that. Those are some of the things that I think I learned, again, talking to my colleagues from, American Academy of Neurology, webinars, going to conferences, or just kind of bouncing ideas with my peers as to what they do.
I would agree with that. I had pretty rudimentary knowledge about RVUs and contracts and billing and coding and how all that stuff works and how it influences the metrics that your institution is using to judge your performance or pay you bonuses and things like that. And honestly, part of this is why I started this podcast, because I was so clueless that I I wanted an avenue to learn about this and to teach other people about it in the process. So I guess I could plug the billing and coding and RVUs podcast and the contract negotiation one, because I think all of those are just so essential as you're going into attendinghood for the first time to understand. I think one of the things that was the most difficult about transitioning for me, and this may have been exacerbated by the fact that I stayed at my own institution, was kind of an identity issue. I was still friends with the residents who I had been training with, but now I was an attending and they were residents, and the attendings that were my colleagues were my previous supervisors. And it was just a weird transitional period. And this may seem silly, but I was like, who should my friends be? Who am I friends with? Who can I hang out with on the weekends and make it not be weird? Nobody, right? And finally I went and sought out some other people at my institution who were new attendings coming from elsewhere, or the residents grew up and became attendings themselves, and that's helpful. But There was definitely this little identity crisis, and I think all of us in our 30s can probably relate to the general overall idea of not really realizing, like, when do you feel like an adult? When do you feel like a fully fledged physician? And I'm almost there, getting there.
It's still a work in progress. Yes, every day.
Yeah, I've definitely heard, so when I was on the job search, there were definitely people who are like, oh, if you stay at your own institution, you're going to be like a trainee forever. But then, if you go to another institution, certainly there's that like more difficult transition of getting to know everyone. So I think there's pros and cons to both. But I think for the people that end up staying at their own institution, Sarah, they can probably relate to your identity crisis. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Now that I'm a little bit into it, it's less of an issue with each passing year. Yeah. And I had the advantage of having lots and lots of people that I could lean on. So, like you said, pluses and minuses.
I think now we're going to move into some questions on clinical practice. And we touched on this maybe a little bit, but do you have any tips for optimizing efficiency in your clinical practice? Sarah, I'll have you take this question.
So I don't work from home, really, hardly ever. Especially in terms of my clinical documentation and things like that. I finish my notes in clinic, same day. And, it's probably helpful that I have residents and fellows with me most of the time. So I'm mostly doing addendums and billing and things like that. But I find that if I do it the next day, it takes me longer because I have to remember what I did and what happened and piece it back together, as opposed to just banging it out in clinic and getting it done. I might leave one note if it's really late and I'm exhausted, but I do not allow myself to get behind, because if I get behind it takes longer in the end. And I really value my home life with my family, and I don't want to be spending my whole home life on Epic after the kids go to bed or whenever. On the inpatient side, I do check in on patients and stuff after hours because I'm, they're attending for those 2 weeks. But on the outpatient side, I don't do that.
I think I am still trying to find the right things that work for me. I do a lot of inpatient and a lot of telemedicine. So when I'm on telemedicine, I work from home. Time management for me is still a personal and professional challenge. I do try to do what Sarah is saying. It's still a process.
I will also add that I have clinics 4 half days a week because I have protected time for other things, and I'm actually part-time. And I do not sign into Epic on my non-clinic half days. I might sign into Epic once on a Friday just to make sure things are wrapped up before the weekend, but I used to kind of sign into Epic all the time on my administrative half days, and you just get swallowed whole, Oh my God, the patient calls and the messages and the refills and the this and the that. And as you're getting through it, more are popping up. And it made me so non-productive on my administrative time. One of my mentors, Elon Lewis, who's now at UT Southwestern, he gave me the advice to actually schedule that time into your calendar. Like, this is the hour that you're going to be on Epic. And I can do most of that while I'm in clinic, while the fellow's seeing the patients or whatever's happening, or between patients. And the rest of the time, I make it that it's a very, very set period of time so that I don't just get absolutely swallowed.
For this next question, we maybe touched on this a little bit earlier, but what do you do when you encounter a really challenging case in your clinical practice?
I have learned to accept the fact that I am going to encounter challenging cases throughout my career. And frequently, these are situations as there are advances in medicine, novel technologies coming out, that these are cases that we sometimes have not encountered in residency or fellowship. When I encounter challenging cases, lean very heavily on my mentors and colleagues. This is still like 2.5 years into my position, so I'm still early career. So I have that blanket still on. But I lean very heavily on my mentors and colleagues. And, when I talk to them, we kind of also rehearse that if something like similar happens in future, what would you do for patient management in that case? I think the biggest thing for me to learn was when I just started, one of my mentors, she was like, just feel free, at MUSC. So she was like, feel free to like text me, everybody else does it. I think it took me a little while to accept that, even if somebody who's 5-10 years into being an attending job, they still have questions and they still text more senior mentors or peers or others to deal with those challenging cases. So what I would say is, trust yourself, but there is no shame in asking for help or looking something up.
I love that, Parneet, because you're modeling for the trainees this, lifelong learning situation, which I agree. I mean, there's always going to be cases that you ask a bunch of different people and they're all going to have different opinions on. In movement disorders, it's easy, right? We videotape the patient and then we take them to video rounds and talk about them ad nauseum and pontificate about all the things that could be going on. And that's one of the things that I really love about movement disorders. And a lot of subspecialties have these challenging case conferences within their subdivisions and can do that as well. I absolutely ask colleagues. I agree, doing that openly is something that I used to be really nervous about, right? As a new attending, you want to be confident. You want your patients to have confidence in you and your peers to have confidence in you. And you want to seem like you know everything. But I actually look stuff up in front of patients now. I'm like, oh, you know what? I hardly ever prescribe this medication. I just want to make sure that I give you the right side effect profile. And I look it up right in front of them. Or, hey, this is what I'm seeing. These are the things I'm thinking about, but I'm not really sure what's going on. This isn't totally straightforward. And I'd like to videotape you and talk to my other colleagues so you can get 5 opinions for the price of 1. Patients don't mind that. They love that you're thinking really critically about them, and it's okay. So I guess that's another thing that I've learned over the years, that kind of humility is well received often by patients and families and colleagues.
So sometimes patients, will come in and they'll make comments like, oh my gosh, you're so young. How long have you been in practice? Parneet, how would you say you respond to patient comments like that?
So healthcare setting, whether it's wards or it's in clinic, it's a very familiar environment for us, but it's challenging and unfamiliar for patients and their families. Keeping that in mind, whenever patients say something like this to me, I usually thank them for their observation and then assure them that even though I look young, I am fully trained and have gained valuable experience in my field, and that I'm dedicated to helping them and providing them the best care and latest advances that medicine has to offer. So I basically try to reassure them while keeping, maintaining professional tone, including nonverbal cues, and emphasizing my qualification and commitment.
So, I used to not really know how to answer this, but if patients just say, wow, you look so young, or you're just a baby, or I wasn't expecting you, or such a young person, at this point, I just say, thank you. And that's it. That is all I say. Thank you. The end. If they directly ask me how long I've been in practice, I tell them. I say, I've been at Yale for 11 years, and I've been training for that long and in practice, treating neurology patients. And I had 2 years of extra movement disorders training that makes me qualified to take care of you, but most of the time they're not directly asking. Most of the time they're just making an offhanded comment, and all I say is thank you.
I do talk longer.
I don't think it's necessary. I think you can just say thanks and move on.
Move on. Yeah. So the next question is about service commitments. So I don't know all the ins and outs of service commitments because I'm not an attending yet, but I've heard from my colleagues who are attendings that, sometimes they'll ask you to serve on various committees, like Grand Rounds Committee, etc. And so how do you balance your clinical commitments with service commitments or committee participation and some of the other things your department might ask of you? Sara, I'll have you take this question.
I really think if you're asking yourself this question, you should listen to the Art of Saying No episode, which is my absolute favorite episode so far of this podcast, which really goes into detail about what you should say yes to and what you should say no to. But I mean, the long and short of it is that you need to understand what your goals are and align what you say yes to your goals. And so if they ask you to be on the, I don't know, whatever, residency education committee or residency interview committee, and education and the pipeline of training is not really your interest and you want to be a clinical trialist and that's what you want to focus your time on, you can say, I'm really trying to focus my time on clinical trials right now and getting these off the ground, and I respectfully decline. And that's fine. That's fine. I sometimes sort of wax and wane in terms of what I commit myself to. And when I find myself getting more anxious and more overcommitted, I recognize that in myself and say, I can't give the time and energy to the things that I really want right now. And so I back off. Because, the reality is that you're actually less productive the more you say yes to. And you are going to impress people less if you're not putting in the time and energy to the things that you have committed to. So you better commit to the right things.
I agree completely. I think I'm sort of starting to figure out that I have said yes to a lot of things, and I've had my mentors tell me that too, and they're like, we have no idea how you do this, and I wanted to take on something else, and my mentor was like, whoa, stop. First, you've committed to so many things this year. Why don't you deliver those? And then maybe you can do this next year if you are still interested, because you are overstretched right now. And if that continues, you're probably going to burn out at a pretty fast rate. I think it's challenging, and it's not unique to me or Sara. It's challenging for everybody who goes into academics, because you have this you want to do a lot and you want to be productive, but you also want to get promoted, and so you have to figure out what pathway you're on. When you sign on to an academic job, you usually are on you're either on a clinician educator track, or you're on a research track, or a clinician scientist track, and you have to prioritize what you say yes to based on what track you are and what you think in the long run your goals are and what's going to serve you when the time for promotion comes. I think some of the other strategies that can help is, having strong time management skills, knowing how to delegate tasks and collaborating with your colleagues, and then having an honest communication with your supervisor and your department chair as to what is it that you really want to do with your career. Saying no doesn't mean you're not a team player, is what somebody told me. It just means that you know what your priorities are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can imagine that, when you're first starting out, there's this urge to really get involved and participate in lots of things. But I also had a mentor sort of warn me that, when you're planting all these seeds, at some point all these seeds are going to grow and you're going to have a lot of projects to work on. So, to really pace yourself. And I think that's really good advice that I will bring forward as I start my attending job in the fall. So thank you all. And so I know Parneet just touched on time management, so that segues really well into our next question about what tips you have for time management. I think we've already touched on some of these with blocking out admin time, but any other advice or wisdom in this area?
I would just double down on the, keep your home life and your work life as separate as you can. I know a lot of junior attendings who have their grant writing and their, paper writing and their notes and all of this just bleeding into their nights, bleeding into their weekends. And I would burn out so quickly if I did that. I mean, I need that time. Not only would my husband kill me, but and my kids would be, not happy, but I just need it. I need it to recharge, and I'm just so much more productive if I didn't spend the whole weekend thinking about this or that, paper that I'm writing. I just put it down for the weekend. Like, it is not on my computer for that weekend. You know what I mean? I just can't stress that enough. It's so essential to have not only very productive in-person time at the office, but also productive, emotional rest time. And it makes you more productive during the week if you get that. It just does.
No, definitely agree. I think it ebbs and flows for me depending on if it's like a week before ISC abstract deadline submission. So a week or two, like most of my work is I would take it home. So a week before AN submission. So it ebbs and flows. But yeah, overall, I think that's a really good strategy that we should always strive for.
Yeah, and not to say that I am perfect in this realm. I am not, but I really consciously and verbally make it a priority. And so I do have colleagues that are like, oh, I'm going to stop emailing you or asking you for things on vacation, on your weekends, we've started using a lot of like emails that automatically send on Monday morning so that people aren't getting emailed over the weekend, or like, hey, I'm not even going to ask you to do this because I know it's your day off, I don't know how much of that is a culture shift in medicine, a culture shift at my institution, or based on my own being really verbal about it, but it's just important.
Yeah, it sounds like setting boundaries is really important for that work-life balance. So thank you both for those insights. Moving to the next topic on networking. So given the pandemic, and Parneet, you could probably speak to this since you became an attending in the middle of the pandemic, but a lot of events went virtual, some are still virtual. How did you get to know some of your other attending colleagues, especially if you're starting off at a new institution?
I think some of the things that helped me was our division had weekly division meetings. So our division director, especially during pandemic when everybody was virtual, now they're monthly, but we had weekly division meetings just to check in. And those were very helpful for me to learn the ropes, learn about what's going on, who are the other attendings, and make connections. And then after that, meeting some of those connections one-on-one was very helpful virtually or in person. What I would recommend is, being a little bit proactive. I was not. It was just all thankful to my division director, Tanya, who sort of pulled me out of my shell. But I think just being proactive and goes a long way to, introducing yourself, telling who you are, where you come from, and just, asking people if they would like to connect.
I stayed at my institution, but I still feel like some of the lessons I've learned apply. I mean, I'm an extrovert, so that makes things easier. I'm the person who has the WhatsApp group for all of the faculty at Yale for trivia night, I put that together. I like being around other people, but Parneet was reminding me when I was speaking to her earlier that I literally text messaged an attending that I had just met who had just come to Yale and said, "Will you be my friend?" It's hard to make friends as an adult. It is hard to make friends with colleagues and integrate into a relationship beyond just passing in the hallway. And sometimes you just have to be direct about it. And I think that's okay. I mean, I think she responded well to that. So I'm assuming with my N of 1 that it's okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's just the general question of how do you make friends as an adult?
It is hard. It's definitely hard.
final couple of questions here, but on the topic of mentorship. So a lot of institutions have a faculty mentorship program where, junior faculty are paired with senior faculty for mentorship and guidance. How would you recommend best approaching mentorship as a junior faculty? And would you say it's any different from being a mentee as a trainee?
So I do think having access to mentorship definitely eases your transition and sets you up for success. It's so crucial if you are going to succeed in your career, whether it's a researcher or a clinician educator, that you surround yourself with mentors. Most of the institutions do have a formal mentorship process. I still encourage to ask during interviews whether they do or do not have a formal mentorship process, because that's how, when I was interviewing, that was one of the questions on my list when I was looking at places. And there are different types of mentorships. We recently had an episode on our Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast talking about mentorship and sponsorship with Dr. Tanya Turan and Dr. Figali Bostwick at MUSC, where they sort of stressed the need for mentorship and what are the roles and responsibilities of being a mentor and being a mentee, and how in the long run it is so paramount to have mentors. There are different types of mentorships. There's the traditional mentorship model where a senior colleague is your mentor / advisor / confidant as you go through your career as a junior attending. But there's also peer mentorship, which I think is as important as having a senior colleague, to have your peers that you sit around with, you bounce ideas, you collaborate with. This helps you socially and also helps foster long-lasting relationships and helps you set up for success. So I think when you are transitioning to attendinghood, just keeping your previous mentors close, but also actively looking for new mentors is very important.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also just add that your mentors are probably even busier than you are. And so taking a lot of the responsibility of that relationship onto yourself and making sure that that you're accountable in the mentor-mentee relationship is really important for it to be a trusting relationship that leads to productive growth for both parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add, because I feel like I didn't really have this epiphany until later on, even until fellowship, but it's okay to have mentors outside of the field of neurology, outside your subspecialty discipline. If I'm going into a medical education career, I can have mentors in internal medicine or emergency medicine or at other institutions. And I don't know why this was so hard for me to grasp, but now that, I have mentors outside of UCLA, I realize also how valuable they are. And especially if we're doing research and we want to collaborate, it's probably to your benefit to really widen your mentorship circle.
For sure. I have lots of mentors all over the place.
For our final question, I think, for those of us who are not attendings yet, we don't know what we don't know. So any final thoughts, tips, wisdom? Sara, I'll have you take this one.
This is so unbelievably practical, but put your CV on your desktop in the format of your institution and update it every single time you do anything. Because otherwise you're going to forget all the stuff that you did. And then you're going to get to reappointment or promotion and have to backtrack and go through your calendar. And you don't want to do that. You just don't want to do that. Just update it constantly in real time, and it will save you so much time later. And also it's going to be okay. It really is. You've gone through a lot of training. There's growing pains, of course, with any transition, but it's going to be okay. And there's just an enormous community at any academic center. Hopefully, if you signed at an academic center, it's a place where there's really a community of colleagues, and we've all been there and we're willing to help. So it's okay.
Definitely. So I think a couple of other things, you should start saving a file or a folder or something where you save your nice letters or thank you emails so that you can look back at those moments during tough days. And then, know your values and don't lose them. Be prepared for frustrations. We are insulated from a lot of things during our trainings, the billing, logistical nightmares of scheduling, RVUs. It can be frustrating, but it takes an average of at least 5 years is what I've heard to feel comfortable as an attending. So we should all cut ourselves some slack. We are not expected to know everything. We should ask for help if needed and find mentors.
Parneet, I love that idea of a pick-me-up folder for hard days. I think I'm going to carve out a space on my desk for something like that. That's great. And then on my first day as an attending, if I get a really hard case, I'm just going to hear Sara's voice in my head being like, it's going to be okay. Oh, man. Well, thank you both so much for all of this wisdom. I think we've covered a lot of topics in this episode. I really hope it's going to help a lot of our listeners. It certainly is going to help myself. So, thank you both again so much for being guests on this podcast.
You're welcome. It was fun.
You're welcome.
The Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast was created and produced by Sara Schaefer. It is not recorded as an official podcast of any institution or organization. The podcast is unfunded. Opinions are those of the individual participants. Music by Audrey Nath. Artwork by Shivani Ghoshal. Want more content like this? Be sure to subscribe to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast on whichever platform you use to listen to your podcast to hear more about constructing your career in neurology. Go ahead, be sure to follow us on Twitter @NeuroBolts and on Facebook @Neurology Nuts and Bolts to stay up to date on new content and give us feedback on what you want to hear. And definitely remember to share episodes with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening and tune in for the next episode.